I want to talk to you about Trump energy policy in a second term, but first, a couple of developments right now. Laura, a storm that looks like it may hit land down on the Gulf of Mexico on Wednesday and be a hurricane. Can you give us an update on the vulnerability of our oil and gas facilities down there?
Sure. Thank you, David. Great to be back with you. We are very prepared for this hurricane that's seemingly moving into this Houston, Southwest Louisiana area. As you know, the Houston Channel is there. Port Arthur, big, huge refinery is down there. Several other important pieces of our oil and gas infrastructure are down there. We have a specialized office here at the Department of Energy that is directed by an assistant secretary that is responsible for our CAT response. Their teams are already evaluating this. We're working closely with the industry. We feel that the industry is very well prepared for this type of storm. In addition to that, the president has directed me to make available the Strategic Petroleum Reserve in instances like this. That's what it's there for. We are doing all that we can to ensure that we are capable of doing that immediately following this storm. So we feel overall we're very prepared. At this point, we'll have to just watch and wait and see where the storm ends up.
Secretary Brouillette, let's move out to California, where there have been these brownouts, basically power going down at various times because it's been very hot, without a doubt. What's going on there? Is there some more fundamental problem?
Oh, absolutely. There's no question about it. California has a long history of getting energy policy wrong. You may recall the blackouts, the brownouts from 2001. There was a market issue back in that point in time where people were manipulating the market, but they were manipulating it because of the wrong policies that California chose to implement at that time. We're seeing some of that replay today. What California has decided to do is to move to a 100% renewable energy generation world. The challenge with that is that, when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, yet people want electricity, it isn't there. So their overall strategy is to borrow electricity or buy electricity from their neighboring states like Arizona and Nevada. The challenge, with that strategy is that when it's hot in California, sometimes it's also hot in Arizona and Nevada, and they may choose to keep their base load power and keep their electricity because they'd like their hospitals to run just fine and air conditioning to work there as well. So there's nothing to sell to California. And that leaves California in the awful position of having to turn off the lights in certain parts of the state in order to meet their energy needs.
So that takes us to that fundamental fork in the road right now, at least between Democrats and Republicans, over renewables and avoiding emissions on the one hand and really relying upon fossil fuels for energy independence that I described.
Right.
At the same time, the Pew Center did a study back in June and said that 60% of Americans really are concerned about climate. I will say it heavily skews toward Democrats. Democrats and Republicans see this very differently. Can we have a bipartisan energy policy in this country?
Sure you can. I mean, natural gas is a very clean source, and we're developing technologies here at the U.S. Department of Energy to make it even cleaner. We're also developing technologies to make, carbon-intense fuels like coal even cleaner. And of course, we always, have had nuclear power for the last 70 years, which is entirely emissions-free. So, I mean, you can do both. You can have a renewable generation base, and you can have an emissions-free baseload generation available to you. You just have to choose to do it. And I think that's what the fundamental problem is in places like California. They've relied too heavily or focused too heavily on renewable power like wind and solar at the exclusion of some of this base load power, which you absolutely need in today's world to ensure that you have the energy you need when you need it.
President Trump's administration has done a fair amount in trying to really, as I say, reinforce energy independence for the United States, relying in part, in significant part, on fossil fuels. What's left to be done if he's elected for a second term? What's on your agenda?
Well, we need to continue to build out infrastructure. So, as you and I have discussed in the past, we have done a great job in America of increasing our production, making ourselves energy independent, relying on new technologies or newer technologies like horizontal drilling and fracking to allow us to increase production of these resources here in the United States. Our challenge today is actually getting the product to market. It's building out pipeline infrastructure to get it to the oceans, to get it to the coastlines. It's building export facilities so that we can make this oil and gas available to the rest of the world, because they're going to continue to use these types of fuels for the foreseeable future, perhaps as many as 40 to 50 years out. And I think it's important that as we do this, we maintain our posture in the world as the #1 producer of oil and gas. And the reason we'd like to do that is because it gives us foreign policy options that I think you were discussing on your show just a few minutes ago. The whole notion that we are able to, for instance, the Secretary of State traveling to Sudan today to perhaps normalize relations between Sudan and Israel, to work on deals like the UAE and Israel. Those things couldn't have happened 40 years ago because we would have been afraid of the reaction in the Middle East, and perhaps we would have endangered our national security by putting our oil supply at risk. We were entirely dependent upon them. The fact that we are independent today allows us to pursue these types of foreign policy options.
Energy is important in our society for all sorts of reasons, but it also is the source of a lot of employment. There are a lot of jobs in the energy industry. And one place where the Republicans and the Democrats seem to be two ships passing in the night is how we're going to create more jobs. We heard former Vice President Biden say he's going to create millions of more jobs by going to green energy. We hear Republicans criticize his policy for saying you're going to lose a lot of jobs. Which is it? Aren't we adding more jobs in renewables right now than we're adding in traditional energy?
Yeah. Well, I can't really comment on Mr. Biden's comments as part of the campaign. I'm prohibited from doing that. So I will stay away from that. But what I will comment on is that, when we look at the technologies that have put us at the top of the world in terms of energy production, hydraulic fracturing, we just mentioned, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce tells me that if we were to do away with that technology, we would lose approximately 19 million jobs over the next few years. And, it's not a question of retraining those people and putting them into renewable technologies. Certainly you can do that, and people may be forced to do that if you do away with this technology. But the challenge with that, David, is that the salaries, according to the unions that we have talked to, the salaries in the oil and gas business are about twice what we're seeing in the renewable energy space. So it's one thing to suggest that you might retrain people and put them into a new role, but you're also giving them a 50% pay cut, according to these unions.
Fascinating. Just briefly here at the end, give us some sense of the investment you're making in new technology at the Department of Energy.
Well, it's enormous. I mean, we're across the board. We spend about $16 billion a year just in basic science, basic research that leads to these technologies that we just discussed. I'm very excited about what's just over the horizon with regard to advanced nuclear reactors. I think we're right on the cusp of not only smaller reactors, higher density energy sources for America that will be connected to microgrids in some cases. We're also excited about moving perhaps even beyond fission energy, nuclear energy as we know it today, to fusion energy. So it's a very exciting world that we're about to face.
Is there a real prospect of fusion energy? People have been talking about that forever.
That's true. Yeah, they have been. But we've made real progress. We've turned around some of the management issues around a large facility in France, known as the ITER facility. But we also have private sector companies here in the United States who have made tremendous advances. General Atomics, several others out in California. They're doing a great job.